We'll go ahead and get started. Good evening. I'm Chelsea Swanson, project planner with the Public Works Department, and joining me tonight is Derek Bailey, principal traffic engineer, and Norma Cervantes is providing Spanish translation. Tonight we'll be discussing potential future changes to the 400 block of Bath Street from a two-way street to a one-way street. We'll go over the presentation, and then at the end of the presentation, you may use a Q&A feature to ask questions or make comments. And you're also welcome to raise your hand and we can unmute you if you'd like to speak. Interpretación disponible en español, elija su idioma preferido. So before we get into the details of the 400 block of Bath Street, we want to share the bigger picture of why this is being considered. We've heard from the community through the development of both the city's pedestrian master plan and bicycle master plan update that biking and walking does not feel safe or comfortable at the Castillo undercrossing under the Highway 101 and also leading up to the undercrossing on Castillo and Haley Streets. Castillo is also a Vision Zero priority corridor, or an area where serious injuries or fatal collisions occur in a consistent pattern. Therefore, this corridor is identified in our planning documents as an area that needs safety improvements for walking and biking facilities. So the city received grant funding to develop a preliminary design concept for these safety improvements, which is why we're now reaching out to the public to receive input on those concepts. The design concepts we're considering would require some changes to the roadway configuration and signal timing. And that's why we're meeting with community members adjacent to the 400 block of Bath Street to discuss those changes first. We'll have two additional meetings next Thursday and Saturday to discuss the details of the larger project. Again, demonstrating the need for enhanced bike facilities. These photos are taken on Castillo Street, south of the freeway, where the bike lane ends and cyclists are forced to ride in the lane with traffic while going uphill. This graphic shows existing bike facilities in the vicinity where the solid arrows are, and future planned bike facilities where the dashed arrows are. You can see where the gaps are in connectivity on both Castillo and Haley Street. This graphic more clearly shows where the project could fill in the bike connectivity gaps by adding new bike facilities where the red arrows are. With regard to sidewalk facilities, there are currently narrow sidewalks on sections of Castillo and Haley with no buffers such as street trees or parkways between pedestrians and traffic. This slide shows the existing condition on Castillo Street with a narrow 5-foot wide sidewalk on the left. And on the right is an ideal sidewalk corridor width, which is a recent project we did on Carrillo Street. The sidewalk corridor is 10 feet wide and has street trees to provide a buffer between pedestrians and adjacent traffic. This slide also shows Haley Street on the left, again with a narrow sidewalk and no street trees or parkway to provide a buffer. Since there's also no parking in this stretch of the street, the pedestrian is even closer to faster moving traffic. On the right is a typical sidewalk configuration, which would again be the 10-foot wide sidewalk corridor with a 6-foot sidewalk and a 4-foot wide tree well area. Configuration is also consistent with the city's pedestrian master plan. Graphic is taken from the city's pedestrian master plan, which again shows the ideal sidewalk corridor dimensions when you have a 60-foot or greater right-of-way width. Okay, next, Derek will describe the details of the different options for bike and pedestrian facilities and how they would change traffic conditions on the 400 block of Bath Street.
Thanks, Chelsea. Yeah, if you can look at the image on the screen, that just shows the Castillo, Haley, Bath area. Where that red line is shown, that's the most challenging place in the entire project to fit in a bike lane. I think for the rest of the project, we've figured out some good solutions that will be very low impact to the surrounding area, but this particular stretch has been a challenge just because the roadway isn't very wide. There's a lot of traffic lanes and a lot of traffic. So if you go to the next slide. So on the left, that's that image that we just looked at. On the right, if we kind of zoom in on the Bath Street and Haley Street intersection, just immediately west of the intersection, you can see the existing traffic lane configuration. There's two lanes kind of pointing down. Those are going towards the freeway on-ramp. And then in the other direction, there's a left turn lane to go up Bath Street and then a through lane to go up Haley towards downtown. So within the roadway itself, the road's maxed out as far as the number of traffic lanes. There's no opportunity to narrow lanes or try to squeeze things together anymore to fit in a bike lane to go towards downtown in this area. Go to the next slide. So one of the options that we looked at was, could we create a bike lane within the parkway area that separates the sidewalk from the street? So this is a photo on Haley looking towards Bath Street. So you can see kind of downtown and the mountains are in the background. That red arrow points towards the parkway area where we studied looking possibly at putting in a bike lane just in that area right there. It would require some construction. But more importantly, some of the obstacles in that parkway area, there's a street tree, nice tree. There's some street lights and some pretty heavy duty utilities in that area as well. So this would be very expensive and we're not even sure if it's feasible at all. So this would be a very challenging option to implement. Next slide. Another option that we looked at was just doing some restriping of the area and whether or not that could be a solution. So what we're looking at right now on the left-hand side of the screen, again, that's the existing lane configurations. And again, going towards the freeway, there's two lanes. That's where one of the lanes is showed in red. That lane would go away. There would only be one lane immediately west of the intersection. And then as you're going towards the freeway, it would open up into two lanes. But by getting rid of that lane just immediately west of the intersection, we can shift things over towards the north ever so slightly, and that would give us enough room for a 6-foot wide bike lane. And that's what's shown on the right-hand image, is just the lanes shifted over a little bit with a bike lane going towards downtown. Next slide, thank you. So that kind of has a domino effect. If we were to eliminate a traffic lane immediately west of the intersection, we call that an accepting lane. So as traffic passes through an intersection, you know, the lane on the far side of the intersection accepts the traffic. If we only have one accepting lane on the west side of the intersection going towards the freeway, that means we can only have one lane feeding into it on the other side of the intersection. So currently on the other side of the intersection, as you're going on Haley Street towards the freeway, there are two lanes. So that would have to go down to one lane feeding into the intersection because there's one accepting lane on the far side of the intersection. That will create some capacity reductions at the intersection. So the thing we were looking at, is there a way to offset those capacity reductions somehow at this intersection? And the idea that was developed is, what if Bath Street were to become a one-way street going northbound towards the intersection? Currently, if you look at Bath Street, there's one lane coming up from the freeway and one lane going down towards the freeway. So if that were to change, that leftmost lane going up towards Haley Street would become an exclusive left turn lane to go towards the freeway. And that would likely give us the capacity to offset the loss of the lane on Haley Street. Next slide. So once that idea was floated, we dug in a little bit deeper and did some traffic analysis. These images show the traffic volumes at the Bath and Haley intersection in the morning peak and in the afternoon peak. And on the left-hand side image, that shows the traffic volumes coming up Bath Street, like from the off-ramp towards Haley Street, is 422 in the morning. That's how much we counted. And going down the street towards the ramp, there was 14. That's how many we counted. And it seems as though most of those, about half of the 14 are headed towards Cottage Grove, where there's residences on there, and some people maybe even be destined for Gutierrez Street cutting through the neighborhood. In the afternoon, we counted 454 going up towards Haley Street and 18 going down Bath Street towards the freeway on-ramp. So the volumes are pretty lopsided coming from the freeway on-ramp. So just from a capacity perspective, it seems like the best lane configuration would be to favor going northbound on Bath Street. Next slide. But we wanted to confirm that, so we did what's called a capacity analysis. There's some calculations that we can do to measure the capacity at the intersection under different lane configurations. During the morning peak, 69% of the intersection capacity is being used. So in this case, what that means is if the number would have been 100%, that means all of the capacity at the intersection is being used and traffic is backing up. Traffic can't get through the intersection. So lower numbers means that less capacity at the intersection is being utilized. So again, during the morning peak, existing is about 69%. If we were to change the lane configuration, that would drop to 46%. So that's actually a lower number is a good thing. It would be a 23% improvement. That means less delay, less congestion. During the midday, again, the existing is still 69%. If there were a lane configuration change, the new would be 55%. And then in the afternoon peak, it goes from 78% to 75%. So not too much different, but certainly during the morning and midday, there'd be a pretty significant improvement with the lane configuration change. But while that looks good on paper, that would mean some access changes to the people that live on Bath Street and have to access the businesses on Bath Street. So and that's why we're reaching out tonight, is just to see what the community thinks of that and if we're heading down the right track with this. So one of the questions is, if there were to be a lane configuration change, what would happen between Bath and Cottage Grove as you're coming up Bath Street? And there's two options, like where would the street become one way? One option is to make it one way at the alley. That's about halfway between Cottage Grove and Haley. And that would mean it would be two-way between Cottage Grove up to Haley, or up to the alley. And then from the alley to Haley Street, it would be one way with the two lanes turning, one going straight and one turning left at Haley Street. The awkward part about that is, especially with parking, we started to think about what would parking look like for people that want to park on the west side of the street, and they would have to go down the alley, come out the alley, and park facing southbound. We even noticed when we were doing our traffic counts, there were quite a few U-turns going from southbound Bath, making a U-turn at Cottage Grove to go back up towards Haley. It seems like most people want to be pointing going towards Haley. Another option is shown on the right side of the screen, where it's just one way from Cottage Grove all the way up to Haley Street. And just from a traffic circulation perspective, that seems to make more sense to us. But again, we'd love to hear what the community thinks about that. Next slide. So how would residents get to Bath Street then if they couldn't go down Bath Street from Haley? If they're going on eastbound Haley, like they're coming from Castillo, going towards downtown, they wouldn't be able to turn right and go down Bath Street. They would have to go over to De La Vina Street and then circulate around back either through the alley or Cottage Grove. Slide. And if they're on westbound Haley Street, like they're coming from downtown going towards the freeway, they would have to turn left on De La Vina Street and again go down either the alley or Cottage Grove. So that would be a trade-off. The circulation and local access doesn't seem like it would be quite as good, but is it worth the trade-off with a significant improvement in capacity at the intersection, as well as creating a continuous bike lane towards downtown? Next slide. And I'll turn it back to Chelsea. She'll talk next steps in the process.
Thanks, Derek. So yeah, to circle back on the purpose of this meeting, we've shared different options for fitting in a bike lane on Haley Street and how it would change the 400 block of Bath Street. We'd like to hear your feedback specifically about those changes before we have our public meetings next week about the larger project. The next steps are 2 public meetings next week to talk about the larger Castillo undercrossing improvements that we're looking at. On October 6th is a webinar. October 8th is an in-person meeting. And in just a second, I'll bring up the webpage where you can go to register for the webinar or get more information about the in-person meeting. And then we will also have a meeting on October 27th at the Transportation Circulation Committee. That is a public meeting. And so it's also another opportunity to attend, learn about the project and ask questions or provide comments. And then following these public meetings, we'll take the feedback we received and analyze it and refine the project accordingly. And we may hold additional public meetings if there's still issues that we need more feedback on from the public. Lastly, the goal of the outreach effort is to have a community supported project that's ready for us to go out for grant funding in 2023 or 2024, which would be for the final design and construction of the project. We do plan to reach out to the community again with an update when we're closer to submitting the grant application. And if funding is received in 2024, we would return to the community again to share updates on the project, likely in 2025. And again, if we have a project to move forward with, construction would likely occur in 2027 or 2028. So this concludes our presentation. We went over a lot of details. So here's our contact information. Feel free to reach out to us with questions or comments on the project. At the bottom is the project webpage. If you go to that and you want to stay updated, you can hit the subscribe button and you'll receive notifications when we have any future public meetings or when we post plans or anything like that. And thank you very much. And if there are questions, you can go ahead and use the Q&A feature or raise your hand. It looks like no questions right now, just comments. So thank you. And if there are no questions, then we will wrap it up and thank you for attending.